Good morning, and thank you for registering for today's webinar, which is entitled The Performance Dividend: How Tronc Design and AI Scheduling Are Reshaping Hospitality Teams. Welcome. My name is Jane Pendlebury. I'm the CEO of HOSPA, the Hospitality Professionals Association. It's Tuesday, the 28th of April, 2026, and it's 11 a.m. We're due to be chatting for around 35 to 40 minutes today, with time for questions after that. So we should be finished before midday. Please do ask questions throughout using the Q&A option. And if there's not enough time to answer all the queries, we promise we'll get back to you afterwards. The webinar is being recorded and we're happy to share the link afterwards. And it'll also be available on our website and on YouTube as usual later this week. So, labour is the biggest cost in hospitality, but it's also where the biggest gains can potentially be. Today's conversation is about two levers, scheduling and Tronc, and why considering both together can benefit a business. I'm delighted to be joined today by Katie Linstead from Grateful, and she's here today as our Tronc specialist, by Paul Watson from Sona, who is our expert on AI scheduling and tech, and Samantha Hamilton Green. I don't know why that was suddenly so hard to say, who is Group People and Brand Director from Dakota Hotels. So thank you all very much for joining us today. So to get us started, perhaps Samantha, I can ask you to set the scene a little bit. You're leading the people function at Dakota Hotels across a growing portfolio. Before we get into the solutions that we're here to talk about today, can you help us understand where the real labour challenges are and what they look like from the inside, and effectively what keeps you up at night?
No, of course, and thank you very much for having me. Just to frame the discussion a little bit, and I'm sure all of us on the call here already know this, but realistically, what we're talking about within the hospitality industry right now is the pressure of costs and how that also impacts us in terms of time and resourcing, right? So everything that we're looking at and everything that we're discussing on this conversation today is how we can also then best meet those challenges with solutions. Within that, it's the unpredictability of demand. We know that within hospitality, we can build rotas on the best thought out forecasts, and it might not be exactly what happens on the day. Everything to managing team shift requests, um, a big element for us within the people team and for our heads of departments, our restaurant managers, bar managers, is how do we save time whilst also still being able to meet all of our team needs. So if Sally can't start before 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, or Bill can't start before 9:30 on a Sunday, how do we log that? How do we make that automated and save admin time back of house so that we're focused front of house? Other key challenges is management of Tronc. And for us, it was very key to be able to get an automated and integrated solution to be able to do that really easily and quickly for our team. Everything from retention, how we focus on keeping our team, keeping them happy despite the pressures that we're all facing, and pay transparency, making sure that the team know what's being earned for tips and know that they're going to be given their fair amount of those tips.
Brilliant. I'm sure that will be really familiar to lots of people listening and watching today. So let's sort of dig a bit deeper into those areas, scheduling and pay and Tronc, and look at what is possible with technology. Paul, can we start with the scheduling challenges that Samantha just described? How does AI scheduling address those issues in particular?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is, or for Sona, is scheduling itself is one of the challenges we need to crack. And Samantha made some really pertinent points there around knowing what your team's availability is, what their working preferences are. We're obviously keeping an eye on the ball in terms of upcoming employment law changes where what constitutes a minimum contract and how many hours would someone ideally like to work versus average hours they work per week. And you have to take all of these different considerations into play. When we talk about scheduling, we're in a beautiful space at the moment where there is so much data available. I think 20 odd years, data has become more and more prevalent. The danger of having so much data is what's important and what are signals that you really want to bring into each of the individual, not just locations, but into the different divisions within a hotel or within a restaurant, because um, there will be different markers. Bank holidays will have an impact. Weather might have an impact. Train strikes will have an impact. Local music events, etc. And it's sort of making sure that we take all of those relevant demand signals and bring those in. But it's not just enough to then say, okay, so on the back of that, let's build out a forecast, or let's start to deploy our hours that we need against team members. We've got to take all of those other employee derived requirements, the availability pieces, to make sure that you are scheduling accordingly. Every business might have their own, I sort of refer to them as soft rules. And they're not necessarily soft. They are typically more culturally aligned, where perhaps as an organization, you don't want employees to work 4 days in a row without a break day. You don't want someone to work 5 early shifts or late shifts. You don't want them to work every weekend, every month. So you have to take all of those different factors. And then when we start to look at that, it's around ensuring that, certainly when you're sort of going into a sort of auto scheduling, or a model which is predicting staffing demand, it's ensuring that all of those sort of relevant factors are taken into consideration, and then team members are given a fair distribution of hours. Because the other part that I think, or the puzzle that people are trying to unpick, is what's the correct contracted hours by employee, by department. Because we certainly, within hotel, we still see quite a high usage or fair usage of agency workers. So it's sort of taking all of this sort of these different signals and different metrics into the mixing bowl, and then start to deploy those out. Where I think it becomes very important, and certainly again looking, is how you can utilize your team members across multiple departments. And we have lots of conversations with our customers where perhaps someone is hired into a hotel to work in a specific restaurant as a bar back or as a waiter or whatever they might be. But actually, what's to stop them from being able to be utilized across different areas, and understanding their experience and their skills and all of those good pieces helps to kind of inform a much better schedule, and deploy the team effectively across the week to meet the demands of the business.
It seems so much nicer these days than it was when I was working in hotels, where no one paid any attention to what any employee wanted to do. But it's
Well,
good. We needed to move
yeah,
on.
and that's I think that's where this challenge is. So we have got so much data, and actually another point that Samantha raised there is around sort of employee well-being and happiness, and how do you correlate those different packets of data? Because if you've got a really good shift and you've got the right team, and they're engaged and they're happy, they will put in that extra discretionary effort. And everyone will have experienced what it's like to walk into a great bar or a great restaurant, and there's an amazing atmosphere. And as a customer, you feel part of that atmosphere, and you're almost encouraged subliminally to spend a little bit more, to recommend to your friends, because, "Oh, I had a great time at this location the other day." And if underneath all of that data, there are things like shifts getting cancelled at late notice, or the team are overworked, or perhaps actually even underworked. Perhaps there's too many members of staff on and it's quiet.
Boring.
The impact that can have on the team's happiness, and therefore the efforts they put in, is definitely a factor. But you have to systemize it, because you can't trawl through all of these reports to try and get to it. I think it's really hard to sort of pick through the data to find the signals.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And Katie, from a Tronc perspective, does it matter who's on shift and how scheduling decisions are made?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, there's obviously the two known demands when you're scheduling, which is making sure you've got enough people to deliver the right service to your guests, to your customers, and then also making sure you're keeping hold of labor costs. But the other sort of leg of that, I guess, from a Tronc perspective, is if there are too many people scheduled on then potentially that's diluting Tronc payments for team members. We've had, clients in the past where they haven't quite got scheduling right, and they've had really busy periods, and the employees are really excited because they think they're going to get, a bit of a bonanza payment from their Tronc, and then been quite disappointed because the Tronc hasn't been all they've thought it would be, and it's come down to overscheduling. And so this is where using kind of smarter scheduling to make sure that you've got the right delivery in place so that you're delivering the service that will bring in that service charge or bring in additional tips is super important. But the flip side of it is the impact on the employees and their motivation to want to work the busier times, but also motivation to want to work the quieter times as too. They maybe aren't always directly connected in bars and restaurants. Sometimes those have peaks and troughs that are very distinct and separate. Whereas in hotels, they're really very linked most of the time. The quieter times are when people are doing the work that, the prep work that allows the busier time to be delivered. So it's, those things are really, really interlinked. And the ability to be able to customize how those things are interlinked are really important as well. So, in Sona, there might be the scheduling that tells us that someone works a dual role and they might work a troncable shift and a non-troncable shift. And we're getting all of that data through, but equally we can turn off different levers that tell us, well, actually, it's not a daily distribution or shift distribution because it is a holistic whole week experience. And actually what we're going to do is then take all of that data and put it into a weekly distribution instead, which means that you keep your staff happy no matter which shift they're doing, essentially.
Yeah.
And they can all feel like they're part of a bigger kind of push to deliver that customer experience.
So from talking to operators as I do every day, some people are really on it with all their tips and Troncs, and other people have quite basic approaches to distributing tips, with really quite little strategic planning involved. What should and what does a modern Tronc system actually need to look like now, further deeper than what you've already explained?
Yeah, so I mean, the most common are sort of points-based distributions. Different job roles might have a point value based on their overall contribution to the customer experience. You might get just equal hours-based distributions, as you said, but more and more often we are seeing much more kind of complex distributions that look at the site and where they are sometimes, because with Dakota, for example, the sites are quite widely spread across the UK and they have different needs. Some might be airport based or city based, and bring in different values. And so a lot of what we do now with clients is really looking at what is the right type of scheme to retain or recruit the best candidates within that site, rather than a sort of blanket approach that doesn't really recognize those nuances. And often there will be differences even in service delivery within the same brand. So it might be that one area is pretty much the same, maybe in guest services, but actually the F&B delivery is completely different because they have different types of sort of areas for the guests to enjoy. So those are kind of nuances, particularly in hotels, that I think need to be recognised within a Tronc scheme in order to, firstly, help employees understand where they sit within that Tronc scheme and that it accurately reflects their experience of working within their site, and also acknowledges the differences between the sites and helps every area really to be able to generate something. One thing that we're seeing as well is that there are some areas where, they don't take service charge, it's just not appropriate, but a customer might want to tip them. And the fact that cash is really not very often held anymore means that we have a lot of clients who might have a combination of service charge and tipping within their EPOS systems, but might have a QR code for leisure facilities or housekeeping, concierge, porters, things like that.
Yeah, so that would account for where you mentioned earlier the trunkable and the non-trunkable shifts, so that they can
Yeah.
pay separately. Yes,
So
I
they can
saw.
take tips for themselves. Yeah, yeah. And
I
those
saw.
can be treated, in the right appropriate ways then for tax, for employment law. The Tipping Act really changed things in October 24 so that there are much more rules around transparency. And there's still a lot of flexibility around what you can do, but you need to make sure that everything's documented, everything's very transparent, and all the employees understand where they sit within that schema.
Yes, as always, communication is key. Samantha, coming back to you, hearing all of this that Katie and Paul have said, from a people director's perspective, what's the impact on the team when a trunk system is well designed, well communicated, compared to when it isn't? Now, perhaps you don't have any experience of when it's not well communicated, I imagine. But how do your staff react to the fact that you have got it quite well sewn up?
Well, just to add to the last point that Katie brought up there, which is kind of non-trunkable roles, a great example of that for us is our concierge and our airport transfer, our team who drive our airport transfers. It was a really it was a really positive thing for the team for us to see. People are bringing a lot less cash. Would you like to have this QR code? That's an option for some of our guests should they wish to. And so that to me was something that was well designed, and again something that we very much wanted to scope out when we were looking at our tech stack from a people perspective. Clearly I'm on this call because we work with Sona and we work with Grateful, and so to be able to link the two systems together and make it a lot easier for our team was a really beneficial thing. And again, very well communicated, especially for us from the guest perspective too. It's not in your face, but it's an option for you should you wish to. But to directly go back to your question in terms of the impact on the team, ultimately, what you can never do is muck about with someone's pay. That's the most, like, you cannot mess about with that. So for us, the massive selling point of Grateful is the portal that our team can log into. We have seen, and Katie tells me it's a lot higher than a lot of your other customers, that we've seen that about 50% of our team have logged into the portal. And that's very key for us in our inductions and all the way through all of our training. We give the QR code to the portal. We make sure people know that it exists so they can access how much is being earned, how much is being split at any time. And it just completely eradicates the kind of feeling of distrust or not quite knowing what's happening with Tronc. Another big benefit to us is on the recruitment side. As we know, especially for food and beverage roles, how much you earn on Tronc can make up a large percentage of what your actual take-home pay is. So through recruitment, being able to signpost candidates to Grateful as our trunk master, to be able to signpost candidates to our trunk charter, which is published and very easily accessible, allows people to calculate this is roughly what I'm probably going to get every month or in the year, and has helped us being able to secure team, I have no doubt.
Brilliant. I love the fact that you said that it's clarity for your employees, but also for the guests, because I think
Absolutely, yeah.
sometimes that's missing. And we all know about the legislation within the industry, but not everybody on the outside does know. So I think
Yes.
clarity for the guest is very important as well. So that's great that they can log in, they can see what they're expecting. Holiday pay. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? Katie, perhaps I need to ask you about this one. When people are looking at their expected earnings, what if they're taking a break, a holiday from their annual holiday leave? How does that affect Tronc, and what do the operators need to know about that?
Yep. So obviously with the integration with Sona, we do get all of that information. And for a lot of our clients, they will have a trunk scheme that pays out, holiday hours whilst they are, whilst they are working. There is an outstanding tribunal case that's currently under appeal, so it's not yet binding precedent. During that case, the judge assessed that in that particular circumstance, Tronc should have been included in the average weekly earnings that was calculated for holiday through the payroll. Now, that's a slightly separate thing from paying Tronc whilst people are on holiday, but in when you look at it in terms of a whole, if someone is being paid Tronc whilst they're on holiday, they're not likely to be raising a tribunal case to say my pay was incorrect during that period. So we have many clients who choose to do this. It is an appeal case that's happening, so we still don't know whether it's going to become a binding precedent or whether it will change. It was an odd, I think, or an unexpected decision, I think, from most employment lawyers that I've spoken to. But there is, there were some, solid reasonings behind it as well. So I think for a lot of employers, really thinking about how you want employees to feel when they're on holiday is important. If there is a huge barrier to people taking their holiday, or they're unable to enjoy that time off reasonably because they have no, a large part of their earnings missing during that time period, then that's not a great way to improve employee satisfaction, or for employees to feel well rested, during that time off. So for a lot of our operators, with our Tronc schemes and with the blessing of the employees, of course, they will have particularly paid leave and sometimes compassionate leave included in their Tronc. So they know that when they are on compassionate leave or when they're on holiday, they will have those hours included, and it means that they will not be financially worse off. And we'll be following the case, that employment tribunal, really closely to see if it really does change anything in terms of payroll rules or Tronc employment law. But as we say at the moment, it's under appeal.
Brilliant. That's a great explanation. Thank you. And Katie, would I be right in saying that London and probably the other major cities have led the way a lot with service charge and Tronc? Certainly, I think service charge on accommodation is fairly London centric at the moment. What should operators outside of London and the other cities, what should they be thinking about right now, do you think?
Well, we've certainly seen accommodation service charges coming up in a lot of London sites and some other city centres, but perhaps slightly slower. There is a lot to consider when you're introducing an accommodation service charge in terms of how that skews overall pay for the hotel as a whole. Sometimes non-F&B workers might have had higher base pay. And if you introduce a room service charge, then that total salary or total earnings package changes a little bit. And maybe then it means you need to get even tighter on scheduling because traditionally maybe those workers didn't use a rota system because they were contracted to work a certain number of hours a week, and it really wasn't something that was necessarily needing to be measured because they maybe weren't paid overtime and things like that. So that's where, again, scheduling becomes super important in terms of how that interacts with Tronc and labour and employee satisfaction, all of those things that are really important right now when competition for great candidates is really tough. And also, retention is probably one of the best cost savers you can look at because we all know how expensive it is to recruit and train.
Brilliant, great. So we're coming towards the end of our main conversation. So let's just sort of get down and dirty as such and make things practical for the HR, finance, and other people listening and watching today. So let's go for some really practical advice. Samantha, if you were advising a peer at another hotel to start thinking about tips, Tronc, service charge, all the bits that you've pulled together so well at Dakota, what would you tell them?
Yeah. Sure, I think straight away, if you're on this call and you're not too sure about what's being spoken about, if you think there might be any grey areas that you're operating in, review your Tronc management processes and ensure you're wholly compliant. And if you're not confident in that, get external support if you need it. To me, that's your number one thing. You just need to make sure that you're compliant. Thereafter, as with any project that you might be undertaking, understand your starting position and where you want to get to with a full strategy. And very importantly, especially within Tronc, we spoke about pay transparency throughout, is a comms plan for your team as well. So if you are going to be bringing on board an external Tronc master, if you are going to be changing what your systems are, involve your team in that process and make sure that you've got good consultation and good communication within that project management sphere. What I would also say is utilize the tech that's on the market to your benefit. That's certainly what we definitely had as one of our key priorities at Dakota. Reduce the administrative process, because everything that we're talking about here, from if a member of the team is sometimes on reception, but they're sometimes on the bar. When do they get Tronc? Do they get it when they're on holiday or not? These can be very administratively difficult to process unless you have the systems to support you. We certainly do have those systems now, and I would definitely encourage that as a key practical step for you to be able to manage the whole undertaking well. And I guess my last point is make sure that you're bringing all the different divisions together within that project too. So ops, payroll, finance, HR, if it's marketing that does your comms, or if it's just one person that's going to do all of these things, make sure that you've got a conversation starter with everybody, because everyone will have an impact on any of the new systems or project that you're bringing on board.
Yeah, they sound like very wise words, very wise words. Paul, for operators who are still running rotors manually, what would you say their first step should be? What's a realistic entry point for them?
Yeah, so no pun intended. I think the starting point is good housekeeping, because it's not a panacea. Like it doesn't solve everything in terms of if your managers aren't putting a forecast in, if you're not getting the right data into the system to start off with, the end result cannot be good. You have to think about how the solution is being used. And for me, I think actually, as Samantha's just explained there, it's identifying the relevant stakeholders. And we talk a lot about a sort of crawl, walk, run methodology, where look at those sort of like key pieces first of all. Have you got the right job roles? Have you got the right contract mixes? Have you got the right operational practices in place? Have you agreed how far in advance an employee should be able to see the first iteration of a schedule? And what's the impact of change on a schedule if it's the week before or 2 weeks before? And certainly if like fair work week style rules are going to come into place, the ramifications and potential costs that are going to be if you start moving people's schedules around as it gets nearer. The crawl, walk, run approach we talk about is starting off with like a solid forecast. Because with all of this, and this is sort of where I'm echoing Samantha's point, is you've got to win hearts and minds. You've got to get the managers to believe in the end result. And if you jump to the end too quickly, it's very hard to unpick and work backwards to find out, okay, well, what was the cause of the problem? They just look at the end result being wrong rather than thinking, well, maybe there was something we could have done in between. So oftentimes we talk about forecasting. Let's make sure the forecasting is correct and we're getting the relevant data points. Within a hotel setting, labor productivity, auto scheduling, all of those good pieces, it probably instinctively falls naturally in those sort of F&B areas where there's a little bit more of a transactional, I order this, I get this, rather than a slight offset in terms of I'd like to book a spa appointment, but that happens tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So I think F&B offerings are sort of the most obvious ones. And we are seeing a trend within hotels of using what might have been more traditionally utilized within restaurant settings in terms of bookings solutions. Every hotel operator I've spoken to has said we can get our bookings data in terms of rooms and availability, but there is a complexity because you do get footfall on the day. You do get people arrive at 3, you can get people arrive at 10 o'clock. So knowing when the sort of action to be taken falls in the day is a slightly harder nut to crack. But all that being said, start with a good forecast. Once you agree on that forecast, it's then understanding, well, what are those rules, be them labor rules from an F&B point of view of if I want to deliver this revenue and deliver that fantastic customer experience, how many team members should I have scheduled at what time of day doing what role? There's also another part of this, which is, falling into that data. Do you have a good grasp of the skills that your team members utilize? And, from our very first hospitality customer with Estelle Manor, when they were launching, they recognized the fact that they had to hire an incredible amount of new employees. How are they going to be able to use those team members effectively across different departments, and being able to measure the skills and capabilities? And if I complete that training, it unlocks this skill, which means that I can now work in that role in a different department. Do you actually have good visibility of that? And do you have a good record of all of that? So sort of getting all of those pieces in place. The final point of all of that is that auto scheduling piece. And auto scheduling is where it can cascade the shifts effectively using all of those different rules and bits and pieces that we talked about to your team members. And we're already working with our hotel customers from a non-F&B point of view around, if you were to build your template, so let's not use any of these sort of forecasting derived rules, what maybe a 50% occupancy template looks like, a 70% occupancy, loading those in and then deploying them across the team. Sort of getting to that from a sort of full data-driven point is slightly bigger than applying your templates, but that's the final piece. And I think the other part here, and it would be remiss of me not to mention this, is there's an awful lot of businesses out there who I think attest to the fact that they've cracked AI and they're all guns blazing and so on and so forth. We were very fortunate at Sona that as a business, we launched when AI was becoming a thing. And when I talk about AI, I'm talking about like agentic AI, where you can actually use a solution to make decisions or give advice or give feedback. There's a lot of bolt-on productivity products now that sort of sit on the outside of a platform. And that doesn't mean that they don't serve a purpose. They do. I think all of our customers that are going down this sort of AI journey at the moment, they are utilizing it to look at all of those different data signals and give advice and allow for conversational interaction with data to say, I think this weekend it's going to be quieter. Does my staffing look correct? And it will start to give you some feedback and advice. Towards, I think about the next 2 or 3 months, we'll start to see a more semi-autopilot where the solution will be able to look at PMS, it will be able to look at bookings data, it will be able to look at bank holidays and weather and say, you were short-staffed on Saturday and Sunday. I can see these 3 employees who are available and they're not using all their contracted hours. Do you want me to assign shifts to them? And the manager can press yes. I think it'll be the end of this year before we go full Tesla mode, where customers would be confident to say, let the solution tell me what it's done. I can always make changes, as long as it's far enough in advance, I can make changes if I don't agree with it. And that's not because the capability is not there. It's because you have to go on this journey. You have to get people to go on this sort of hearts and minds journey with you to really believe and have confidence with what's being suggested, by what's being shared. And we don't want to take the control away from any manager, but what we do want to do is allow the manager to really flourish in what they've been hired to do. Deliver great customer experience, look after their team members and upskill them, and let the solution do the heavy lifting for them and kind of be that almost like digital assistant that's going, hey, I've noticed this, pay attention to it, or yeah, that's fine, I'm on top of it. But we want the managers to still feel the control, but not have to do all the sifting and heavy lifting. So
interesting.
practical advice, have a conversation with us. We're more than happy to talk. But if anyone's on this call feeling we feel like we're left behind, I think as long as you're in the conversation now, you're not. I don't think anyone is sort of at that full, everything's just running on autopilot yet, regardless of what you might read on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I have got some questions coming in for you, but I'll come back to those because I've
Mm.
got to give Katie the opportunity. Have you got any practical advice for someone who knows or maybe hasn't got a trunk system or knows their trunk scheme needs work but doesn't know where to begin for you, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one really important thing is to make sure that you, I guess, don't settle on a scheme type because of lack of, I guess, flexibility or tech or, know-how, knowledge. There are people out there, obviously people like us, but there are people out there who can help you with the best of both. You need the compliance advice and the tech. And if you're going to go for an external provider, someone who's willing to customize a scheme so that it actually fits the needs of the employees and the business and the service delivery model is really important. I don't think it's fair on employees to be restricted to a type of allocation simply because the tech that has been used won't do it.
Mm.
It should be right for what's happening in that site. Um, and also really auditing what's happening across your service delivery and any documentation that you have and whether it has or hasn't been communicated to employees is really important. If employees have some knowledge but not much, and they're under the impression that one thing is happening, but in reality, in your calculations, another thing is happening because perhaps those instances have been really separated, then that's not a working trunk scheme. And from a point of law, but also employee satisfaction, that will never work. You need to, like Samantha said, bring together sort of the payroll side, the HR side, the operational side, and make sure that everything is working as a whole in terms of what information is feeding into how a trunk scheme works, but also what has been communicated to the employees and what they understand about it.
Yeah.
And making sure that information is published to the employees and they have access to it at any time.
Yes, I think that's the theme throughout this, isn't it? Make sure we're communicating back to all the teams that are working in the hotel, restaurant, whatever it might be. Um, right, we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I shall try and pick ones that are going to be hopefully most useful for the wider audience here. There's one here for you, Samantha. As a Sona customer, what has been the most effective AI feature your team are using? I don't know how easy that will be to pin down, but that's specifically for you.
Good question. I think, well, for us on the crawl, walk, run cycle that Paul's referring to, we've been with Sona for about a year now. I would say that we are walking, and I think running is really the next stage for us. So, for us, the main benefits so far that we have seen, and certainly the feedback from our team, is the team app itself and everything from being able to use the news feed, being able to communicate out changes, being able to pick up shifts, being able to communicate and all that element of it. And although that's not AI, that element has been the biggest benefit of us so
Mm.
far. And I think to Paul's point in terms of the end of the year and actually being able to go on, I think you used Tesla mode, to be able to go on to Tesla mode is something that we're looking forward to.
Brilliant. And related to that, actually, one for you, Paul, here.
Mhm.
How does a hotelier or a restaurateur best manage the change to get managers to actually trust AI scheduling?
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of work to to make sure it's believable and relevant. The way that we have built the AI capabilities in Sona is to understand the hospitality sector. So I'm sure lots of people on this call dialed in would have used ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it might be. The more you interact with it, the more it's got a sense of awareness of who you are and how you interact. And we've trained the agentic model within Sona. It's called Raffi, if anyone hears the name Raffi, but that's essentially what the product is. It sits right at the core of the solution to understand the nuances of hospitality. So when you're asking the questions of it will obviously be responding back. I think the with a sort of hospitality nuance sort of answer. I think the key piece is being able to look at the reporting that resides within Sona itself and sense check that information against the output that you're getting. So, You know, you can see that is a direct match. There's no hallucination or whatever it might be. Certainly some of the interactions we're seeing are a little bit more data led. So tell me where I've got some overspend this week, or at what point of the day during the week am I spending too many hours? And you can almost back up that finding by checking it yourself.
Okay.
The key one for us is where we're looking at if Rafi is making suggestions to the end user, if it is being ignored or being accepted in terms of you should possibly make change, is how do you then measure that historically? And that's the key piece of, okay, it told you should have put 2 extra members of staff on, or it told you that actually you've got an employee who's had 2 weeks worth of holiday or had a holiday request in for 2 weeks and it's not been approved. Let's materially look at what their employee net promoter score is afterwards. You know, what impact did that have? So it's looking at the data behind the event as well.
Perfect.
It is a journey.
I'm sure, yes. Katie, you were talking about Tronc and attracting staff based on what they might earn. The question here specifically is how should Tronc be treated on recruitment adverts to attract team members? Are we allowed to state the Tronc amount? So that's one for you, but then I think Samantha might want to add to your answer as well, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it very much depends on the scheme. There are some schemes where you have a very clear set of data, previous data that tells you that they generally will receive something between X and Y. And with recruitment kind of advertising, it's really important to distinguish, firstly, the difference between house pay and any expected sort of and using the sort of phrasing on target earnings when it comes to Tronc, because it's not guaranteed, it's not contractual, it's completely discretionary, and it needs to be clear that that is a separate amount of money that's being paid from the Tronc master rather than from the business. But yeah, you can quote ranges for sure. If you feel like you're not too sure what where the Tronc is likely to sit. For some businesses, you can really clearly say it will be £1 or £1.50 if there is enough service charge, because that generally has always happened, plus a variable amount. I think the really important thing is just to make sure that it's clear that it's not one total amount that's coming from the business, because that would be falsely kind of advertising. The employee may think that that's going to be their base pay, and then they're going to receive Tronc on top of that. So the really important thing in recruitment is to make sure that it's just really clear, and that if you don't have a value you can commit to, perhaps using a range or just suggesting there will be Tronc on top, or just saying there will be Tronc on top.
And Samantha, thank you, Katie. Samantha, did you have anything to add to that, or has Katie hit all the points?
I agree with all of that, and I think ultimately, if it is your decision as a business not to advertise, or you might not know what that range looks like, just make sure that the recruiter is aware of what that scale might look like, because if you don't advertise it, people will ask. It makes up so much of what your pay is probably going to look like. It matters. So if you don't advertise it, people will ask proactively, and you're still going to need to respond with some sort of estimation if you don't have it just yet, at some point in the recruitment process.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And Paul, one for you. And I think a lot of your clients are F&B related, but the question is, you've mentioned a couple of examples regarding F&B. Do you have any examples with housekeeping schedule?
Yes, I was just looking through the questions actually, so glad this one came up. The interesting thing with housekeeping is that I think so we've been able to, I suppose one of the party tricks within Sona is that you can build your own metrics dependent of department. So for housekeeping, quite easy for you to sort of configure functionality which says based on occupancy or types of room that are sold or booked. What that then correlates to in an amount of required hours, or if you're doing a conversion and turning that into sort of housekeeping points, whatever that might mean. Or simply based on this occupancy, we need this many housekeepers, this many public area attendants, this many people on reception, etc. we can derive those metrics and deliver those to the manager. It's really important that whatever those kind of North Star KPIs are, we want those front and center for those department managers. The labor productivity and auto scheduling piece. So based on that, templates, and then allowing those templates to be auto scheduled across team members. That's something that we can deliver at present. Where Michael, who's our head of Labour AI, where we're having lots of good conversations with our hoteliers at the moment, is how do we start to go down that journey with housekeeping in the same way that we have with F&B, where it is a little bit more transactional straight away. Because as an example, I was talking with a hotel group the other day where they were saying, people will say on their booking what time they are expected to arrive, but that's not contractual. They might arrive later, they might arrive earlier. You could assume that, well, you'd need to get all the rooms ready for 3 o'clock, but does it make it the most effective rota when there are certain metrics that are hidden? The other challenge to it is around how you get your data. So if you're using bookings.com or something like that as an aggregator, sometimes you don't get that information. Sometimes you don't get to see when someone said they're going to arrive. So that's the piece that we're working on at the moment. We can deliver the metrics. We can help with the auto scheduling piece, which just looks at, okay, well, based on this template of required shifts that you would build, that then can deploy it to your team members. What we want to do is fully automate that piece. But for us, that's conversations with those partners like bookings, solutions, and all of that good stuff. But keen to have conversations.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, about the distribution from front of house and back of house staff. How do you handle that, Samantha, within your hotels, looking after the people who've notoriously always got tips, the waiting staff in the restaurant, but now because it is more widely spread, how do you plan to make any changes to anything you're doing front of house and back of house at the moment with distribution of tips?
Again, it's about communication. So for us, it's been very clearly communicated the service charge is on food and beverage earnings, and the team are all very aware that that's shared within food and beverage team members, and that's where the Tronc lines are. And we spoke earlier about other ad hoc tips that might be received through a different part of the Grateful system, such as for our concierge team or tips that might want to be left for the housekeeping team. But it is very clear that Tronc is for the food and beverage team, and that's how it sits for us and our business at this time.
Brilliant. Katie, I remember when we did that event at the BT Tower, it was before the legislation had come in, and we were talking about how on the Monday morning that it came into power, whatever day of the week it was, there was going to be a massive queue of people at HR saying, but I typed the menu up, or I did this. So I don't know if that's actually happened. Probably not. And I hope I'm not giving anyone any ideas or any problems that they're going to incur
I
because of
actually
it.
think the biggest thing that's impacted queries like that has actually been people using AI, as in ChatGPT. They phrase their question in a certain way about the legislation, and so they get the answer they want because of the way they phrased it. So then they will come to HR or to the Tronc master, absolutely convinced that they understand the legislation, but the legislation is quite a large and complex body that is particular to the site they're working in, the way the operational delivery happens, and so might not every individual working in a business will know how everything else works. So that's probably actually the thing that's affected questions the most, to be honest.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got some comments here on holiday pay, but I think that could be a webinar in its own right, and we probably need to wait for the tribunal case. But yeah, comments about should you or shouldn't you, and I think you made the case for very strongly that you should. But the comment here is, doesn't this take away from people that are working, and would customers expect the tips to be shared with people that aren't working? But I think if we go down that rabbit hole, we'll be here until midnight, and we won't be. We have no listeners left.
Perhaps just one comment would be, particularly in hotels, a lot of work happens to build up to certain events or busy times. Someone may have spent an entire week working on an event, but then be off on holiday when the event takes place. Surely they should be sharing in the work that they've done there. And the real point from the legislation doesn't prescribe either way. All it says is it should be allocated fairly in that place of business, and that it should be transparently communicated to the employees. So if they're happy with it, then it's fair.
Brilliant. No, that's good. And as we come back again, it's the communication, which Samantha, you've obviously got going very well with your teams, which is great. I think we've got time for one last question, and I think it's for you, Katie. For multi-site operators, where each property has different revenue profiles, do you recommend one scheme or separate schemes?
Well, I guess the body of the scheme is in the way it operates, assuming that the service delivery is the same across all sites, could be the same, but then there may be nuances to do with, is there an hourly rate? Is there a points value? Is there enough funds for a certain type of delivery or allocation method? That doesn't need to be the same per site just because it's the same brand. I think it's really important to recognise that if you have a site in London, you have a site in Cardiff, they will generate very different amounts of money. And in order to be competitive in the London site, you may need to make some changes, not to the integrity or the overall allocation method of the service delivery is the same, but some changes to the way that the monies are allocated in order to make sure that you're recruiting and retaining the best candidates. And similarly, when it comes to resort versus city, those are very different types of service delivery sometimes, but might be within the same brand, and those need to have the nuances recognised. So it's not necessarily a totally separate scheme, although that may be the case. Often big hospitality groups might have totally different brands under one umbrella. But I think it's really important to make sure there's flexibility in everything you do and you recognise what's happening within the site.
And I guess that's what you do, Samantha. Do you have different setups for different hotels and different locations, or is it one standard?
It's relatively consistent, but ultimately grateful consulted with the team in each different site as the Tronc was being set up, and whenever the Tronc charter is updated, grateful work with the teams on site. So organically, different teams suggest different things. They have a vote, and that's what's passed. So not something that we have set, but it has organically encompass the different nuances of different sites through the Tronc master as time's gone on.
Okay, perfect. I think we're pretty much drawing to a close. There are a couple of questions outstanding, but they're quite system specific. So what I will do is share those with our speakers afterwards and get back to you, although they have come through anonymously. If you want to send any questions directly to any of the team or directly to me and I can forward them on, then please do. But I think so that we do make sure we give people their time back before midday, we should draw this to a close. But thank you so much, Katie, Paul and Samantha. There were some really wise words there. And I think the overriding thing, as ever, is communication. Get that right, whether that's from implementing a system to implementing policies or sharing best practice. That's got to be the winner at the end of the day. Thank you to all our listeners and for lots of questions there. I've no doubt that lots of people will be making copious notes during today's webinar. As always, if you need formal advice, then please approach your professional advisors or come to me at HOSPA for a referral. And also, please let me know if you'd like to be directly introduced to any of today's speakers. I'm sure you'll be able to find them on LinkedIn if you don't want to come through HOSPA to do that. And then finally, please take a look at hospa.org for other upcoming events. We've got the National Hotel Marketing Conference, which takes place on Thursday this week. I'll be chatting to Hotstats and RBH about the first quarter's performance on the 7th of May. And also on the 7th of May, we'll be out and about with Ryan Haynes and the Hotelier's Voice, this time in Stratford for a roundtable discussion. Our ever popular annual Great Green Balloon Debate returns on the 12th of May in London. That's going to be at the Claremont Charing Cross. So please do come along to that. It's always a really informative evening and a lot of fun. On the 19th of May, we'll be at the Everyman Cinema in Broadgate with New Wave Hospitality. The programme is nearly finalised for that and promises to be an event packed full of expert speakers. And then June is also a very busy month for the HOSPA team. 2 roundtables with Hotelier's Voice on the 2nd of June in Kent and the 9th of June in London. Our annual finance update from BDO is on the 11th of June, which is a must attend for finance, anybody involved in finance and hotels and hospitality. And then our last one in June is on the 22nd at the Waldorf Hilton, and that's our annual Hotel Marketing Awards. So please see hospa.org if you'd like to register for any of those. But thank you again to all the experts here today, Samantha, Katie and Paul. You've been utterly brilliant. So I'm sure our audience have loved it. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you all for listening. I'm going to sign us off now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.